Hey guys, my name is Grant. I just want to talk about some spicy Dota takes today. I started playing Dota in early 2013, so coming up on 10 years, so I've had plenty of experience hearing all sorts of crazy takes. I posted on Reddit a couple hours ago asking for some people's hot takes, and we got some pretty interesting stuff that I want to break down here. So let's look at some of these takes and break down whether I agree with them, disagree with them, and why. Out of Toilet Paper says, I think it'd be interesting if they kept up with the spell damage types like Fire, Frost, Lightning, etc. Now I do get why some people might think it might be interesting to do this, it might add a little bit more of a mechanic to the game that isn't there already, but I think it'd be very bad for the state of Dota. They already tried this a little bit with the Brewmaster Cinder Brew getting ignited by like fire damage. That was extremely quickly patched out and just kind of replaced by any damage would proc it. The reason why this was taken out so fast and why so many people had a problem with it is because it added too much of a forced synergy, and it was kind of Valve like holding your hand telling you like, oh, you should play Jakiro with Brewmaster because he has fire damage and it's going to be really good. Dota compared to other MOBAs is very kind of loose with what kind of combos work, with what spells go well together, and it doesn't really hold your hand and force you to kind of play the way that the developers intended. For the most part, all Dota spells are pretty simple, but the way that they interact with each other and with other hero spells is really what adds the complexity. If you go in and add all these damage types, I don't actually think it would make the game more complex. I think it would make it more complicated. I think there would be more things that new players have to learn, which is already something that Dota struggles with, but I think on the other end, it would actually make the game simpler because there's kind of more forced things, there are less open-ended options that you can do. Next up, we got somebody on a throwaway account saying that they don't think it's a hot take, but having multiple accounts is perfectly fine and acceptable. I definitely understand the appeal of this, and I don't think this is just speaking about having Smurf accounts. There are times when I wish I could have a separate account to play different roles or practice different heroes that I don't play very often without having it kind of like impact my main account, but I've never been somebody who has alt accounts, and I've always just dealt with learning new heroes on my main account, so I definitely disagree with this, but I can see the appeal. There was a short time where support and core MMRs were split, I believe, in rank, and I think this thought process is somewhat similar to that, where you're probably not as good on certain roles as you are on other roles, but definitely the problem with this comes when you start smurfing, playing at different ranks where you're not really supposed to play at. The problem becomes when the ranks on your different accounts aren't the same, and whether you're intentionally or unintentionally smurfing, you are just ruining people's games at that point. I think there are rare occasions where if you are like an extremely high ranked player or a professional that needs multiple accounts for whatever reason, I'm not able to speak on that because it's kind of above my pay grade, you could say. But as far as the average player goes, you really shouldn't have more than one account for pretty much any reason. I don't feel the need to go into here about why I think smurfing is bad. I think we all agree that it's a bad thing. And definitely if this post is just talking about, it's fine to smurf, who cares, it's fun, get good, then I completely disagree with it. This next one comes from NZ Ryder and is a topic that I definitely wanted to cover. He says, I think there should be a surrender feature in Dota, such as in other MOBAs, though it should need to be unanimous. If there's one player on the team that sees the way to win, the team should continue to play. And then he continues to talk about some of the potential downside. Now, I have limited experience with other MOBAs like Smite and League who both have surrender features, and it is something that I greatly dislike in both of the games. I know the first thing that most Dota players talk about when this topic comes up is the fact that you're removing the ability for a lot of comebacks to happen because people are much more willing to give up and just send next if they have the option instead of actually continuing to try to come back. And there are a lot of games where you are kind of completely given up, and whether it's the other team throws or somebody on your team makes some crazy play where you will come back even though you've kind of mentally given up a bit, but you lose the opportunity to do that completely as soon as you add a surrender button. And I do agree that's true. Comebacks are one of the most fun parts about Dota, but they do kind of come at the expense of all the games that you don't end up coming back and you just kind of have to waste another like 15 minutes of your life sitting in the game where you're almost certainly going to lose. So from that perspective, I can definitely see both arguments, but the thing for me that definitely pushes it towards me not wanting this in Dota is the fact that it removes so much of the fun, in my opinion. One of my favorite types of heroes to play in Dota is snowballing mids. I like heroes like Storm, Quap, and Puck, where you can have a really good lane, and then you can go and dominate and have this really strong point and just kind of do whatever you want in the game and feel insanely strong. Now in Smite, there's a lot of heroes that are kind of like that too, which are really fun. But the problem is, if there's a hero in Smite that's completely snowballing and out of control, as soon as the 10-minute mark hits, which is when you can start voting to surrender, a lot of teams will just give up right away. And it's extremely frustrating to play all of these games and then do well in the laning stage and then just not ever be able to play ahead during the mid game. And then if you're a player like me who doesn't like surrendering, and I'm sure many Dota players who go to play League or Smite are the same way, they just will almost always vote no to surrendering. And if you're like that, you'll end up playing the entire duration of games that you're losing and only a fraction of all the games that you're winning. And maybe this is just a personal problem that I have and maybe I should surrender more, but there's so many games where people are voting to surrender and then you do end up coming back, even in those games where I can't justify it to myself unless the game is looking completely horrible. And the thing is, I don't really trust myself, let alone everybody else in the game, and let alone Valve coming up with some software system to detect when a game is truly unwinnable. I don't think there's really any way to truly determine that. And since that's the case, I don't think there's ever going to be a good way to give Dota players the tool to just vote to stop playing. Because people will take that, people will get upset, they'll vote to stop playing, they will start kind of griefing. This is something else that people talk about a bunch, is if 3, or in the case suggested here, even 4 people vote to surrender and 1 person doesn't, the people who do want to surrender are more likely going to start kind of griefing, which I know is just kind of a guess that would happen, but I'm sure it would happen occasionally. If I did have to come up with a compromise here, I would be okay with if your team voted like 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 to surrender after you lost all of your racks. I could kind of get along with that idea more so than just at a certain minute point you can start voting to surrender. This next one is actually something that I saw come up a lot, so maybe it's not as much of a hot take as some people expect it to be. There are about 15 responses of people saying that BKB should be removed from the game, or it should be insanely nerfed to a point where it's not really recognizable from what it is right now. I know people have had problems for a while with BK being as strong as it has been for the last year or so, where people can just buy first item BKB and it's kind of like a mandatory thing, and almost no matter what hero you're playing, you can pretty much get away with getting a first item BKB and it's going to be pretty strong. I do agree that that probably isn't a healthy place for Dota to be in, but I definitely don't think the item being removed or incredibly nerfed is a direction that we should go in either. The main thing here is we can't just straight up remove BKB from the game. It would completely unbalance everything. Dota would not be recognizable from the game it is right now. Heroes with long stuns would just be picked every game. Chain stunning would be just completely brutal. It would be a nearly unplayable game, in my opinion. Without removing it, if you just heavily nerfed it, it would be somewhat of the same thing, not to the same extent though, where these heavy, long-duration stun heroes, or any hero with a bunch of slows or things that get purged by BKB, would just kind of rule the game, and it would be extremely annoying to play heroes that kind of rely on BKB. So if we want to get rid of BKB, the thing we have to do is kind of go a step backwards and redesign basically the entire way that CC works in Dota. And we can't just rework how CC works in Dota, because there are certain times when 8 seconds of continuous CC is needed to even counter certain heroes. If there's a hero on the other team that's incredibly strong compared to the heroes on your team, they're snowballing or whatever, and it's a hero like Quap or AM with a blink, or a hero like Tidehunter, who if you don't blow up right away are going to get off this huge teamfight spell, you need to have these opportunities for these long chain stuns so that heroes like that aren't just incredibly overpowered. If you were to remove BKB from the game and half the duration of every stun that's in the game right now, heroes with high mobility are just going to become way too strong. So then we have to go back and redesign how mobility works in the game, and when you do that, there's going to be more problems that come up and more problems that come up, and it's just going to get to a point where we're not really playing Dota anymore, because we're going to have to rework the most basic framework of the game. And I might be being a little over dramatic here, but I don't really think I am. I think the majority of these kind of big macro ideas of Dota are very healthy, and it's something that I feel like is definitely missing when I go and play another MOBA that is designed around not having BKBs, so the spells are kind of less powerful at their peak. I can definitely agree that BKB in its current state, or at least the state it was before last patch when it got the 15 or so second cooldown nerf, I think that BKB could be considered unhealthy for the game. But I think the direction Valve is going right now with this last patch is definitely taking it in the right direction, just nerfing it bit by bit, and just kind of making it not such an early purchase, I think is making it far more healthy. So I can somewhat agree with this take that I have right above my head right here, but the ones that are saying that BKB needs to get removed from the game or go down to like a 3-second duration, I think those are kind of absurd. And if we do go in that direction, we're gonna just have to change way too much about Dota, otherwise the game is just gonna be completely unplayable. Okay, so this next one, I wouldn't even consider that much of a hot take, maybe more so a kind of taboo subject in Dota. This is Zebra saying sometimes it is your team's fault. Zebra, you are definitely correct. Sometimes it is your team's fault. Sometimes there is a single person on your team who has griefed the game beyond repair, and by grief I don't even mean intentionally. Sometimes it's somebody who just played extremely bad and you kind of needed them to win, or they fed somebody and it's extremely improbable that you're going to be able to come back from it. And in that case, it kind of is your teammate's fault. But I think pretty much everybody would agree there are times when there is one player who really shouldn't be blamed for their team's loss. Maybe they even played extremely well and they still lost, and it's definitely not their fault that they lost. You can find some people way out in the like PMA mentality edges where they would say, if there was X pro player playing in your shoes, then they would have won. So therefore, you could have played better and you could have won. So you should never blame your teammates. There, I guess, is some value in that, where you can always play better, you can always do more to help your team win. But that statement can be true alongside not being your fault that you lost. The reason why this is kind of a touchy subject is the people who usually are the most likely to blame their teams, not only in Dota, but any team-based game, are the people who are least likely to take fault for things that happen. And once you start getting into this habit of blaming your teammates or focusing on small mistakes that they make, the more likely you are to kind of forgive mistakes that you make, or not even maybe forgive them, but just not even see them. So yes, it 100% sometimes is your team's fault. There are definitely unwinnable games, and sure, a pro player might have won in your shoes, but you're not a pro player. You should not be expected to play like a pro player in some random game where you're in a bad situation. But you should not have the mentality, at least if you're trying to get better, that any game pretty much is your teammates' fault. You can acknowledge that a certain player didn't play well on your team, but that should not take place in your mind over you thinking about what you could have done better. Unless you're extremely high MMR, you are not going to be playing with the same people on your team frequently, so there is no reason after the game ends to give any of your mental capacity to thinking about what your teammates did. It should pretty much all be internalized as far as what you think you could have done better so that you can learn and go forward with that. Sure, you can look and say, this is the mistake that my teammates make, and learn from those also, so you don't have to make that mistake going forward. You can learn from teammates' mistakes as well, but you should not be using teammates' mistakes as excuses to excuse your own mistakes. That is all I'm going to cover today, but if you did enjoy this style of video, there are plenty more hot takes where that came from, so I might make a follow-up of this eventually where we look at some more. If you did have any hot takes that you have, feel free to leave those in the comments. I'm also going to link the Reddit post below in the description, so if you want to take a look at that, see some other people's takes, or leave yours there, that is cool too. This is kind of my first non-educational video that I put up on the channel. I just kind of started putting up videos a week or two ago, and I want to somewhat strike a balance between the educational stuff and the more entertaining stuff like this. So if you want to check out some of the educational stuff, you can check out the other videos I've uploaded, or you can just subscribe so you can see when my new content comes out in the following days. So other than that, thanks for watching. That's all I got.